Oh, hi, everybody. Welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kirby. And of course, we talk to small and medium-sized nonprofits doing wonderfully great big things. I can think of no better person to have a conversation with today about big dreams and hopes and big missions, all compacted into a very small, medium-sized organization. Heidi Holliday is the executive director of Consensus KC. She joins us here on the official Do Good Better podcast today. Heidi, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Patrick?
I couldn't be better if I tried, and I'm really happy to have you on the show today because we are entering politics season, and we are entering like conversations about political and really neighborhood, like micro conversations about what's happening policy-wise. And I'm really intrigued about the conversation we're going to have today. But if somebody's scrolling around, they're like, Consensus KC, I don't know what this is. Why don't you tell everybody? Kind of give us a 5,000-foot view on what your organization does. And floor is yours.
All right. So Consensus KC, we're a small nonprofit based in Kansas City, and our mission is really to put the public in public policy. We believe that people should have a voice in the decisions that impact their lives. So since our founding in the 80s, that has been the work that we've done. And it's taken a number of different tracks. We do that through hosting conversations where we can provide the space and the structure that's needed to bring people together who might not otherwise get to interact with each other, who might not otherwise agree with each other on anything political or religious or whatever the topic is, but really provide that space where they can have an intentional dialogue. So we do that sort of community conversation part. We also do public engagement where we work with cities, counties, libraries, other nonprofits to build a more robust engagement process around whatever project they're working on.
That's excellent highlight. I love that. And I think this is such a wonderful time to talk about these things as
Right.
we're kind of seeing, and again, it might be just me, it might be just me paying attention to the internet, but there seems to be such radical divide against things that we should just probably agree upon, but we can't actually find a space or a structure to have conversations that are constructive. Is that a fair assessment? I mean, I feel like that we're always looking for, and in the grand scheme of things, regardless of whether you're a nonprofit or a for-profit or whatever, we can't seem to get in a room together. I mean, I know we can't because it's COVID, but like we can't seem to get in a space together to have those conversations to begin to come up with solutions rather than sort of sound biting at each other.
Right. And that is really the core of our work, because we believe that when people are given the opportunity to actually listen to one another, to actually talk with one another, we can find common ground. We can find things that we agree on. So often when we are doing this work, we will tackle a really difficult subject. For instance, immigration or education, or we just did a conversation last month on elections. And we're tackling these really difficult subjects, and we're intentionally trying to recruit people from all different sides of this issue to talk and to have that space to listen to one another and come up with a new understanding of another person's perspective. When we're able to do this in person, we'll actually do a step further, and we will often come up with what are the policy pieces specifically that we can agree on as a large group of people that are meeting together. We are still figuring out exactly how we adapt that to the virtual realm. There's a lot of national networks that we work with that are also experimenting with doing that. But right now, in the time of COVID, we're just providing the virtual space for these conversations to happen, because otherwise we get siloed. We talk to the people we agree with. We listen to the news sources we agree with. We think the other side is crazy. We fight with family members. And honestly, we are in a time of national crisis. I mean, it's worldwide crisis. We've got the pandemic. We've got a movement for racial justice that's going on. We've got fears and concerns around the election. We have so many things that are pressing on our time and attention and that need to be tackled as a society. But oftentimes we're just yelling at each other from across the room, and we're not actually trying to figure out how we can build a society where we can all live together.
I have so many questions.
Ultimately what we have to do.
I know. I have so many questions because I think this is any conversation that one has with anybody politically at this point is either there's one side or another.
Right.
I feel like most people are in the middle just trying to figure out a way that everybody can agree and get along and then we can move on with our day. That takes time. however,
Right.
right? So let's talk about education for instance. Let's use that as an example. Schools are going to open, schools are going to shut, schools are going to go virtual. Everything is just kind of a crazy, I don't understand about education, whether it's a quality of education, education, or anything in between. That takes a long time to parse out. For example, we got our school opening policy or our explainer on like what we're going to do for a policy. It's 92 pages. It's a 92-page PDF form that essentially says we're open 2 days, closed 3. That's it. But it's so much information. And I feel like I want to know it all, but I got through page 5 and I said, screw it. I just want to just know the basics of the basics. How do we start to have conversations where very complex things that require a great deal of knowledge, how do we start those conversations when we have the attention span of gnats and we can only work in 144 characters? I'm confused. I need help.
No, that's a great point. And I am super glad that my kid is too young to have a 92-page booklet on school reopening at this point.
You are fortunate for sure. But that's part of the problem. It's so much information to dissect. Right. And we're so busy, and but at the same time, we need time to explain and explore some of the nuances of why people have come to the same conclusions on what education means in this country or in this community. How do you start? That's a really
Yeah. So if we're taking the question of education, I think we start with what are the common things that we hold dear as a society. So I think the common things that we hold dear are children deserve a good education. And I'm spitballing here, so I might be missing some of them, but we're working on this conversation guide for later this month, which I can talk about in a little bit. So
hope that conversation guide isn't 92 pages. I'm just saying.
No. We make it much more simply. So what are the things that we hold dear as a society that we can agree on? So kids deserve an education. They need a good quality education. We want to keep our kids safe. And then there are a lot of questions around what to do and how to do those things in the time of COVID. And I think it's okay for the third point to be, we don't know the answers. So if we go from that standpoint, and we really believe that everybody has the best intentions at heart, that there is a way to like talk with one another about what each of those 3 values that we're identifying as like a basis for the conversation are, then we can start to ask the questions that really get to why some people believe in-person school is better, why some people believe virtual school is better, why a combination approach might be taken in other cases, what the unique circumstances that might drive each family to make the decisions they're making are, and then what are the constraints that we have as a society around parents' work. I mean, that's a huge other piece of this that like we will be exploring later this month as we develop this conversation guide on parenting during the time of COVID and school decisions and education and all of those pieces, because there are really no right answers right now. Like everybody has a different situation. But what we do in that circumstance, like say there's, which is exactly what's happening right now in Kansas City. There's, every district has a different reopening plan. Every preschool, which is my current experience, has a different reopening plan and different sanitization of whether masks are allowed and all these different questions. And right now, I feel like the only way that I'm having these conversations with other parents is over text, over Twitter, over Facebook, over Instagram. Like social media is my main interaction with a lot of other parents, other than the conversations that we host at work, because we aren't able to gather in person. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that Consensus is doing as a response to this is creating a conversation guide that could be used by different groups of parents, community groups, whoever, to actually like delve into these issues and kind of talk about them. Because I think that the schools have done the best that they can in terms of like weighing all of these values and weighing these concerns. But there hasn't been, in many cases, a way to include the parents in that conversation. And I think that that is what we're starting to see right now with all of the parents saying like, I love that you are like taking the health of my family and my kids into consideration when you say that school is going to be all virtual. But for instance, my husband is a nurse. I'm lucky that I work in a flexible nonprofit job where I can work from home if my kid is at home with me, or try to,
Yeah.
but like, what do folks do who are essential workers? What do folks do who are working retail, who don't have family members in the area? Like there are so many different considerations that go into that conversation. And often we're just not able to even have those conversations because we don't have the space. So what we do as an organization is we intentionally provide that space, provide that structure, provide that facilitation so that we can talk to one another. And hopefully at the end, you can come out of that conversation and understand, maybe not agree with, but understand why somebody else might make a different decision than you did.
What would you consider a win or an achievement out of that? Because, I mean, there's so many. Like you just said, you listed off 40 issues,
Right.
39 of them that I deal with right now. And I listen to that list and I go, that is an exhaustive amount of things that we could agree upon.
Right.
But where the conversation starts, Lord only knows where we go, because
Right.
the world is, if we're doing it on social media, it's the world of trolls. And how do you do that?
Right.
From those conversations, what would you consider a win or some sort of achievement that you could say, okay, we as Consensus KC understand this, or this small thing that we can build upon for a larger conversation or a latter conversation?
Sure.
As is?
So what we try to do after we host those conversations is, because we've identified facilitators that are working with each of these small group rooms, and we try to make sure the groups are no more than 5 to 7 people. And, you know, we provide a really in-depth structure for how the conversations happen. We have someone recording the notes, and then we do a report back at the end. And what we do is we summarize, like, what were the biggest concerns that parents had? What were the big sticky point issues? What were the things that we just couldn't agree on? Mm-hmm. And then what we're planning to do is we will type those up, make that available as a report for, this is like what ordinary parents across Kansas City are thinking about, and make that available to school districts, to elected officials, to others who might be interested, and then replicate that conversation if there's more interest by another group that wants us to host that.
Right. I like that because it's clear, it's definable, it's tangible. And then you can go back and say, okay, I think we agree on these 3 points. What can we develop here as our next stepping stone, right? And the majority of you sort of understand this. And even if you don't agree on it, at least you understand where everybody's coming from. And that, I think, is there's so little common ground, or that people, I think, understand that they have common ground because they're not given the space to find it out. And I think that's the interesting part. What you're doing there is you're allowing time and energy that you can find that first step and go, oh, this makes more sense.
Yeah, no, I think what you just identified is one of the big issues that I think has been augmented by our current period of like social isolation, is that we aren't given the time to talk with, to seek out people who might disagree with us. Yeah,
I think that's really one of the key points, and I really love that. That's what the organization is all about, is that space given to it. And if you know, do you have any other chapters, or is this just Consensus KC? Are there Consensus chapters all over the United States? There should be, if they're not.
Well, thank you. No, we are the only chapter. We work with a national network of other nonprofits and other coalitions that are kind of working on similar work. We all go about it a little bit differently, but like one example of this is back in March, we are usually part of a national effort called the National Week of Conversation, which is just what we were talking about. It's a really cool project nationally. Hundreds of organizations will participate in it, where you tackle a difficult topic and you bring people together to tackle this difficult topic. We had plans for what we were going to do for that this year, and it all got canceled. So we, along with a whole lot of other organizations, are part of this national network that was working on it, and they identified a new opportunity called the Weaving Community Coalition, and it's weaving.us is their website. And there are groups like ours around the country that are hosting these conversations. We do it weekly. I'm not sure if anybody else is doing it quite that often, but we do it weekly along with the Kansas City Public Library. And the thought behind it is that times of crisis as a nation can either like further divide us, further augment those divisions that are already in our society, or it can be a way that we can start to figure out how we can build bridges and how we can build community.
Yeah.
So we jumped onto this because we were like, we had a whole year of in-person events planned and now they're all canceled. We need something to do. So we just started like figuring out the technology, and we've hosted these Zoom calls every week since March 25th. So we've had over 160 people join over the course of these conversations. It's usually small groups of anywhere from like 6 to 18 people that join us on any given week. At first, we were really just tackling like, how are people doing? Like, this is a really weird time. None of us have been through this. Everyone is sitting at home. How are you still finding community? How are you still building hope? How are you not getting depressed? Like, what are you doing? And so we heard these beautiful stories of like, one person's partner is a musician, and so he did like a concert on his deck, and the whole neighborhood like pulled up their lawn chairs, socially distanced apart, and listened to this concert because everyone missed live music. Another person talked about providing support for a neighbor who had a medical emergency, and how even though everybody was, trying to be really cognizant of the health risks of COVID, at some point you like, if a neighbor falls down, you go over and you help them up. How people were texting neighbors about like, do you need groceries if they're at the grocery store, checking in on older residents, checking in on people who are immunocompromised. I mean, it was just really incredible to hear these stories. And as this group evolved, we've started to tackle some bigger issues. So it was kind of like a trust building exercise. Like, we've started with these small things that we could all agree on of like, this is really tough. How are we dealing with this? And then as we moved into May, we were talking more and more about like, what are the social inequities that are being highlighted by the pandemic? What are the things that we're seeing? Because that was a huge issue around, emergency assistance, around food access, around rent, and like whether there was going to be a rent moratorium that was extended, and all of those and unemployment. I mean, on my block alone, there were every single one of my neighbors, including my own household, had people that were either furloughed or hours cut back because of the pandemic. And so how were we talking about these issues? And then we started to tackle some more work around racial justice during June, and we've started to tackle more issues around news. Where are you getting your news from? What are your concerns about the election? Today, we're talking about schools and education. So we're kind of going into that conversation we were talking about earlier, just in a small, informal way today. And then in early September, we'll do the big, large 100-person conversation over Zoom.
Right.
So,
and just to kind of go back from the how do you start thing, how do you start a conversation where immediately the topic itself is political? You're right, I'm wrong. Like, how does that, because like, let's just say, let's talk about, let's talk about equality, or let's talk about education, right? Things that one shouldn't have as political. But you talk about racial equality, for example, immediately there's a left and a right, and there's a right and a wrong, and there's a, you can't do this and you can't say this sort of conversation. Is there a way that, I mean, even if nonprofits are looking at having these internal conversations themselves, they're listening to this podcast, you're a business listening to this, instead of saying it out loud, and already just saying it out loud gets people mad. Is there a way to sort of just lay it out to say, we're going to have a talk about this, but it's not going to be one view or another? I mean, because I feel like, right, if you even say, we're going to now have a conversation internally at our business or at our nonprofit about equality and race, instantaneously that is now a political argument that you're now starting. Even though you just want to have a conversation about it, you're just starting it because you said it out loud, you whispered it. And because, like you said, you're getting news from either side of that's where it's going to come from. How do you start that?
Sure. So, I mean, we start that in the same way in many ways that we start any other contentious issue, which is to really start from what people's experience has been and is.
Yeah.
Because I think that oftentimes we jump to an assumption of a level of understanding that people have, and we don't give space for the initial, like, this has been my experience of this. This has been my experience of growing up Black in America, or growing up white in America, or growing up poor in America, or whatever. We haven't given that experience. Or, I mean, honestly, in our racial justice calls, we also had people that had grown up in other countries, which was great to have that perspective as well. So we try to offer that space to even start from like understanding where each other are coming from. Now, I know that we as an organization can do better, and we are trying to work to do better on this. But what we have started from is this lens of like, if we can just even start to understand where people are coming from, provide resources. We started creating in June a resource list for our Weaving community chats, because every week we were asking people, what are you reading? What are you seeing? What are you listening to? Yeah. And so we needed a way to record all of that information. So the library has this great resource where they can create these resource guides, these web guides. So we've just been putting all these books up there, and we don't necessarily judge whether they're left or right books. We have people on all sides of the conversation that are coming in. And we list those resources that are up there. But I think even providing space for people to reflect on what their own experience has been and to listen to other people. And we try to do that where, you know, we will structure the conversation where each person gets 2 minutes, and then everybody gets to talk before you respond, because we want to make sure that nobody is, you know, overtaking the conversation, and that everyone has a chance to share and to listen, because that's something that, you know, as you were saying earlier, in this harried like digital society where we all have 45-second attention spans, like spending an actual 2 minutes of listening intentionally to another person is a kind of revolutionary act. And we try to do longer than 2 minutes, of course, but yeah, it's providing that space for the conversations to even begin, I think, is one of the big pieces.
I love that. And just to even bring it back to a nonprofit that may not be in the public policy space or in these conversations, talking to your potential supporters or donors or community about the experiences of those that you're trying to fundraise for is such a great piece of advice. You've given just a brilliant instruction manual on how to start a conversation. It's just by giving experience and perspective of those you're trying to help or those that you serve in the community as a ground. This is our foundation for a conversation. I'm not going to ask you for money. I'm just going to talk to you about the experiences of those that we're serving, because that might begin a secondary conversation about how they can help if they're interested. And so what a wonderful guidebook that you've given everybody, in regardless of whatever space they work in the nonprofit world. That's an excellent choice. You know, you mentioned before we even hopped on the air here, that you had to cancel some of your fundraisers and all of your in-person events and things. Talk to me a little bit about the fundraiser that you canceled, because I'd love to sort of have this perspective on how we create within this environment of just all digital conversation pieces. But walk me through the experience that you had from your fundraising, because you're a nonprofit, you need funds in order to, you know, do your great work, and you cancel out of the blue. This is because of, you know, COVID. Now what?
Yeah, and that's the big question we're struggling with right now. So since 2012, we have hosted an annual awards celebration called the Civility Awards. And the awards really honored and recognized people that were doing the difficult work of building bridges across political divides, across religious divides, racial divides within our city, and sometimes beyond as well. And so we've hosted this award in person. We have struggled with whether it was a fundraiser or not, or whether it was just something that we wanted to do because nobody else was talking about these people that were doing this really difficult work. We finally agreed that it was a fundraiser like last year. We actually earned money. We actually broke even. Nice. That was my first year leading it as director. And then we had all these really great plans and like big ideas for doing it this year. And then we just realized as we got further into COVID that there was no way that we could do it in person. The population that has typically attended it, like our core population, tends to be a little bit older, and we didn't want to expose anybody to anything. And we didn't want our name to be in the news for that. We we just felt like it would be irresponsible as an organization to move forward. It's a breakfast, so people would have masks off. And we tried to explore how we could do it in a digital sphere or at a drive-in theater or something else, and it wasn't going to work out. So now we are instead taking this opportunity to reimagine what the Civility Awards might look like. We are rebranding as an organization, and we're really excited to launch our new logo and our new website soon. It really speaks more to like the work that we do to bring people together. We've used not just like red and blue in our logo, but we have purple in there too, which we're really excited about this year. So
like it.
The little things sometimes, but
you know where your state is. You know your anyway. It's fine.
Well, yeah. I mean,
self-awareness.
Kansas and Missouri, we gotta be aware of that. So so we are using this time to reimagine as an organization what the Civility Awards, or what an annual event that accomplishes the same thing that the Civility Awards was doing might look like. And we are just kind of in the beginning stages of that. Last year we netted about $2,000 from the Civility Awards. So, I mean, we're tiny. Our budget is $60,000. I'm part-time director. Like, yes, we're doing a lot of engagement work. We have subcontractors occasionally on some of the work. We're small though. And so we're just really trying to figure out what that looks like moving forward.
I think a lot of people are in that situation right about now too, though. And I think you're doing it the right way, which is reimagining what you've been doing for the last 8 years. If you had not had a shutdown for COVID, you would have done the same event you've been doing for the last 8 years. And with your rebrand and with your trying to figure out whether it's going to be a great fundraiser, just a fundraiser, getting out in the from an awareness standpoint, it's a wonderful internal conversation to have.
Yeah.
And now take it as an opportunity to sort of reimagine what this could be, and how the Civility Awards plays today as sort of like the verbiage now, right? So civility probably has a different meaning now than it did when you started 8 years ago, where it's like civil servants, and now to, my God, can you just agree on something on the internet, civility, right? So now you've got an opportunity to really come out and say, we're going to do this and acknowledge a different set of folks and sort of refocus a little bit too. It's a wonderful opportunity, I think.
It is. And that conversation about the word civility has been going on internally for several years too. And so we've been struggling. We always mean civility in terms of like civic engagement, like you are civilly involved. We have honored people that are challenging the systems that be. It's not, you need to be polite and follow all the rules. It's you're civically engaged, you're building bridges, you're doing the tough work of bringing people together in these conversations and in these spaces. But we also know the word can be used as a weapon, and that the word can be used as a way to tell people to get in line. And so we're trying to figure out a new way of framing how we honor the people that are doing these difficult tasks and jobs every day.
Well, I'm excited that you're going to do that, because I think this, again, it gives you an opportunity. And for every nonprofit who's sort of looking for, what do I do next? Using this time and using this space to create something brand new out of kind of what they've learned, I think is a really interesting opportunity. As a thank you on how I can thank you for being a guest on the official Do Good Better podcast. How can I help you with some fundraising issues? 2,000 is great. You deserve 20,000. How do we get there? What sort of questions can I answer you in so much that helps you sort of rally the troops from the fundraising front?
Yeah, so our donor base outside of the Civility Awards is like pretty much our board and a couple of other like past board members and people that really love us. So one of the things we are working on is just even trying to develop a CRM and trying to like start being more intentional about donor cultivation. But because we have nowhere to start, we're just kind of like winging it. So the board has agreed to do, I think it's called the circles of influence thing, where I, write the letter for them. They email it out to their friends. People are a little bit nervous about that because there are a lot of financial constraints. We have people who represent lots of different parts of our city on our board. And so like, whether someone can ask for $5 or $10 from a friend, or whether someone can ask for $100 from a friend might be different. But a lot of times our donor base has been like, we rarely are getting gifts over $100. So
Well,
yeah, just thoughts about that.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because I think a lot of the groups who are looking for brand new donors are going to ask that similar question. And my counter to this is always, are you asking for more than $100? Or are you providing them an opportunity to give more than $100? And if you aren't, that's a wonderful way to start. So providing an impact statement or a case of support on why one should give you, and I usually ask this with clients too, which is, if I had $1,000, why the hell should I give it to you? And usually there's a blank stare, like, well, because we're awesome. And I go, but yeah, but what's my impact? What am I going to get out of that? Or what am I going to produce? Or what are you going to produce with this particular gift? And I think that gives you some pause to sort of like, okay, well, let's start. If you ask for small, you're going to get small.
Right.
And I think that's really where you need to position that as well. It's a mindset thing from a fundraiser standpoint, but it's also positioning. It's like, we do great work. And if you do great work, you need great deal of money to do even better work. And then sort of that's how I would envision it. And also it's circling back to some of these previous conversations that we just had on how many people attended your workshops or your conversations over the past couple of months, 160 some?
Yeah. Somewhere around there.
That's 160 people that would be interested in what you have to say. And
right.
So grabbing at least those as a starting point, it's a great donor-based start.
Yeah.
And those are people who are outside of your board of director influence anyway. And I think that'd be a really good place to start. And if you're a nonprofit listening, and you've got people who are showing up and listening to what you have to say, grab their information, at least an email address and a name.
Right.
If you can get more, the better. And that's kind of where I would start. And so you've got a wonderful set of skills. You've got a wonderful opportunity, I think, to engage a ton more people. But ask for more, you'll get more. It's my advice to you, Heidi, on this.
That's a really good point. I appreciate it.
I don't want to say goodbye and thank you for this podcast without giving you an opportunity to tell people in our listening and viewing audience how they get a hold of you. How do they give you a big old sack of money if they've got holding on? They're like, I like what Heidi does. I need to give to the consensus KC. How do we do it? How do we get a hold of you?
Sure.
The floor is yours.
All right, so our website is consensuskc.org. We are updating that, so if you go to it this week, it might look different next week. We're also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We are not on TikTok. We've had conversations about that. We are doing this work within the Kansas City region. We also have actually worked nationally. So if you're like, we want someone to come in and lead a strategic planning process or do something else, like we do consulting work for about 50% of our income as an organization. So reach out to us. My name's Heidi. It's just Heidi at consensuskc.org. And if you're interested in the conversation that we're hosting in early September on parenting in the time of COVID, we are hoping to make that conversation guide other people to use. So just reach out to me. It'll be posted on our website once that's done too. If you are in the Kansas City region, you are welcome to join us. It's on September 3rd. It's done with the Kansas City Public Library and the Women's Employment Network. And it's a 90-minute conversation for up to 100 people on how they are handling these difficult parenting decisions during the time of COVID.
Outstanding. Heidi, you've been a wonderful guest. Thank you so much for joining us on the official Do Good Better podcast. As always, we'll put all of that info in the show notes. This was fantastic. I love this. I love the beginning of the conversation. I love where we can kind of start on agreeing with things, and so appreciate you being a guest today.
Thank you. I really appreciate being here.
I love it. We'll talk to you later.
Okay. Bye.